Okay, well, we'll kind of start here officially. We'll start the recording here. And so welcome to Teaching Talk 64. I can't believe we're in 64 here. Today we're talking about class projects, challenges, and opportunities. And I really wanted to do this one because I do a lot of class projects. I know Solange does, so I knew we would have a good discussion today because I think class projects could be considered to be one of the best approaches for our students in terms of doing something that's really hands-on, applied, in depth. That's kind of a culmination, almost like a portfolio, if you will, of everything the students have been doing in the class. At the same time, there are significant challenges. And when I share some of my stuff today, and Solange and Justin, if you have class project stuff to share as well, I really want to emphasize that I think there are some things we can do with the scaffolding of projects ahead of time that maybe can guarantee more success. And just we'll go through each of these in depth, but just as a highlight, we'll talk about class projects, the kind of the values of those, and then some of the challenges. And for me, one of the big challenges is the procrastinating student who says, I'm going to wait until week 10. My project is due in week 11 or finals week. I'll wait till week 10 to get started. So I've put some things in, and I call these thresholds or deadlines. Throughout a class, we'll talk about this, where you might first have step one is turn in a project proposal. Step two is do a class check-in. Step three could be a discussion board where students talk about their progress and so forth. And then also today we can look at examples of projects, and I'll show you some of mine from my last class, which was last quarter, Anthropology of Music and Sound. So maybe let's start with just how would you define in your own work, and again, I know Solange, you do a lot of class projects. What do you define a class project as? What's the point of it? What does it look like? Why do you do it, kind of thing?
I teach DMA 101 is video editing, and it's a DE class. It's distant education only. So there's no Zoom time. Mm-hmm. So in order for me to know the progress of each of my students, I have to have them, I give them assignments every week in Premiere Pro that will allow me to know exactly how their progress is going, and it allows them to learn one step at a time. Mm-hmm. So they'll take a step, they'll import video, they'll import audio, and then they will do the task at hand for that week. Every week is a different task. So every week is importing video, importing audio, doing the work, posting it in discussions, using YouTube as the format, and a screenshot of Premiere Pro. Every week. There's a project due based on the task at hand.
That's amazing. So in a sense, the way you're doing it is it's like a practical hands-on approach. And you almost have it, you have it throughout the entire class. So that's a great way of approaching a project, because really there's no procrastination. If they don't get with it in weeks 1 and 2, they've fallen behind, essentially.
Correct. Yeah. They have to submit every week. There is no end of the quarter project that you're working on all quarter. You actually have to fulfill the assignments every single week.
Wow. I think it's really good. It's a great approach. I don't do it that way, but I love it, because if you're teaching someone and you want them to do a hands-on approach, you can't just talk about stuff. You actually have to get your hands dirty, so to speak. So I think that's a great way of approaching things. Great. Justin, do you do class projects in your courses?
So I'm starting to do it this quarter, actually, in this class I'm doing currently. So what I normally do, and I'm actually combining it with something that I normally do in my classes. So normally, because I teach in religious studies and humanities, normally they always have like a major essay due. And as part of that major essay, earlier, depending on whether it's quarter, semester or something, either a few weeks prior to, or even longer prior to the essay being due, I have them turn in an outline. And the outline is basically a template that I give them. So they just have to fill it out, but it asks for information like, the title, proposed research questions and topic, primary text that they've chosen, a provisional bibliography that is probably going to change. And that bibliography needs to meet uh, specific sources that I require in the syllabus. They have to cite, for example, one monograph, one edited contribution to an edited volume, whether it's a handbook or encyclopedia, a peer-reviewed journal article, and so on. And so they do that, and some other information I have them do in the outline, like actually outline what their essay is going to look like, with bullet points and so on. And so that gets graded. I give them feedback on that to help them improve on the essay before the essay is actually due. And then they also get graded on that as well. But what I'm doing this time to create more of a project out of it is I'm including a presentation that's required along with the outline. So they're going to have on the same due date, they'll submit that same outline template, but I'm also going to require them to do a 5 to 10 minute video presentation. Since it's an online class, they're going to be using probably Canvas Studio to record their videos or whatever else they would like to use. But I'm asking them to use screen share to capture a PowerPoint lecture of not very long, just about 5 to 10 slides as well, very short, talking about their outline and the proposed essay and kind of what they anticipate and so on. And so they'll be graded on the outline and the presentation together, split sort of in half. And then a few weeks later, they'll have the actual essay due, which will just be graded like a normal essay. So I'm kind of calling that a project, more or less.
Yeah.
I think that's great. And you're adding a component there that I think is important. And I do this as well. It's saying you create a project. So in my class that I'll show you later, it was a PowerPoint or a video they could create. And then I said, all of you have to use Canvas Studio. So I did tutorials, and we'll talk again about the scaffolding or undergirding for your projects, because it's also a great opportunity to go to the values of projects to teach a new kind of technology. So in Solange's class, it's implicit. You have to learn Premiere Pro. In my class, they don't join and necessarily think, oh, I have to use Canvas Studio, but I want to encourage them to use it as you're doing to present their own project video, because I realize they have to use Canvas Studio in other classes. So I really like the idea, and I would do this for my face-to-face class too. I would say, create your project and then present that to the class, almost like what you do at an academic conference. Do a presentation, maybe 10, 15 minutes. We'll have some Q&A, and then you get feedback from your peers. So I think how you're incorporating multiple modes in there is great. Writing, using a bibliography, understanding sources, and then having to do a presentation. So I think if we can encourage our students to learn some new skills like presenting in front of a class and learning a video technique, whether Premiere Pro or Canvas Studio, much easier to use, of course, we're doing double duty or triple duty, whatever you want to say, in terms of encouraging them to learn different important skills of technology, of public speaking, of academic research, of hands-on approaches, doing video and audio and so forth. So really great examples there of what the projects could be. I wish we had some art folks as well, because I know in the arts, there's a lot of emphasis on, sculpture, or three-dimensional, two-dimensional painting or a sculpture. They create a final project or a portfolio, and then maybe they have to present that to a mock jury or they have to defend it. Ages ago, I used to do what's called a poster session. So a poster session at an academic conference allows people to present, if you will, a poster board, a fancier version, it could include video, at a table where it's a more interactive approach to discussing your research versus giving a paper, standing at a podium, people falling asleep in the audience, checking their phones, etc. So I used to do this years ago when I first got to the college in the early 2000s. We would set up these big, like they use for the art show, these big boards that are on wheels, and then my students would create a poster board on a topic I chose for them that quarter, and then the poster boards would be put up in the Commons. And I had faculty judges, Phyllis Schaefer from the art department, who's retired, a few others, and they came in and actually judged all my student projects. And it was a ton of work for the judges, and I kind of stopped doing that because I felt like it was asking them too much. But one of the curious asides with this was one quarter I said, for my anthropology class, you all need to do a poster board and presentation on the topic of subsistence in anthropology. So things like, hunting and gathering, or making a living, or, providing for your household, whatever you want to define as subsistence. Well, I had a couple guys in the class, and they didn't attend class. They didn't read the project assignment. and they both did poster boards on NASCAR racing. It was like really strange. So they came and their two poster boards had cars on them, no explanation. And all the judges and myself, we were just kind of like awkwardly like, oh, that's interesting. But that was my first light bulb that went off that I said, I can't just go into this cold. I can't just say to my students, do this project. We'll all meet in week 5 or 6. You'll present your posters in the Commons. So I realized I needed, and we'll talk about this in a bit, I needed to build in a little more scaffolding where they had to approve their poster topic with me. They had to check in with me and so forth. So I wonder, do you, in Solange, in your case, it's like all 11 weeks, but Justin, do you have anything built into your project assignment where you can assess that to avoid that scenario where the two guys come in and totally clueless at the end of the quarter and they've done something that you didn't ask them to do? So do you have sort of steps built in for that purpose?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I do, but now that I'm thinking about it, I wonder if it's almost too late the way that I do it. As part of their outline, and as part of the instructions in the outline, and that I give them with it and the syllabus and everything, I indicate that I have to approve the. So for this class, it's really big on primary or ancient texts. So I'm asking them to identify one of the assigned primary texts, or even a couple of them if they want to do like a comparative mythology kind of study. But they have to pick one of those, and it has to be approved with me. But also the title of their essay needs to be approved.
Wow, that's good.
Title and topic and so on. And so, so there's some controls there. But the mere fact that the main kind of requirement of the essay is you have to pick at least one or a couple of the assigned primary texts means that they can't go write about NASCAR, for example. They're going to have to write about one of the topics of mythology that we've looked at. So there's some controls there. What the part that worries me a little bit was more about like kind of the titles they're going to choose, or kind of how they're going to go about talking about that topic. Because I intentionally wanted to leave that a bit open, so that way they can be more motivated by things that interest them and get a bit creative. But I'm almost worried that some students might get a bit too creative to the point where they're not talking about mythology anymore, even though they apparently had picked a text or something on it. So I don't know. I think it should be fine, but we'll see.
I hate to throw a wrench in it, but talking about NASCAR, so there's actually a group, you can Google them. They're Christian racers in the U.S. Yeah, so you think it's fun? No, there's probably a religious connection to racing cars. At least one I know of. So,
okay, well, if they do that,
yeah. He just, in my case, there was no connection to subsistence other than you drive a car maybe to go to the grocery or something. But I think having as much information ahead of time now, whether students take advantage of that, and I'll talk about my class later. But my real concern about my class last quarter was, it was literally half their grade. And I told them, I sent warning videos and I was stern. I felt kind of bad about it. I said, if you don't do your work, I'm not grading these pass fail. If you don't do well on an assignment that's worth 50% of your grade, you're going to fail the class or get a D. So I worry about that. For me, the class project is, to go back to like values, one of the best things we can do. It's an example of students taking charge of their learning. It's like presenting to your colleagues in the class. But then you have the potential of it going off the rails. I think I told Justin years ago I had a guy who was way into conspiracy theories, and this was for my deviance class, and my joke about it was maybe he was a little deviant in how he approached his project. But he essentially stood up in front of the class, and if you know Alex Jones, kind of the crazy conspiratorial guy, he sounded like Alex Jones. He was it was word salad, and I finally kind of had to cut him off. And it wasn't very good, and he clearly thought he could just walk in front of the class and give, just word salad and not take any time to formulate his thoughts. So that was like another warning I had, that if I'm doing final presentations, I have to tell my students, like Justin's doing here, define, you need a bibliography, you need to speak for 10 minutes, you need to cover this. It has to be academic. You can't talk about conspiracy theories or stand in front of the class and do a rant. And I love projects, but I'll tell you, in terms of the challenges for me, sometimes the challenges outweigh the values. And I sometimes think, like, if I taught this class again, would I do a final project? Maybe not, because that one bad presentation, and it could be my fault. Maybe I haven't done enough to scaffold the project and say, I'm going to take you through these 5 steps to get to the quality version at the end. But I'd be curious, like Solange, what do you do if you have a student, let's say in the first 2 weeks of the quarter, they're learning Premiere Pro and they're totally struggling and you're thinking they're not going to get the next assignment. How do you deal with that with someone falling behind early on in learning Premiere Pro?
Fortunately, I've not had a student that actually started falling behind in the first 2 or 3 weeks. But this quarter, we are in week 6.
Right.
And I have a student who does not have access to Premiere Pro until now.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So how do I deal with that? Well, I have to open all the discussions because every single week has been an assignment on Premiere Pro. So she says she's willing to do, she's kept up with all the lectures. She's taken all the quizzes and she's doing fine, but she'll have to catch up on all these assignments. Well, because all of the assignments are posted in discussions, she has access to her fellow students' assignments in discussions because she can actually watch what they did. So I have the confidence in her that now that she does have access to Premiere Pro on campus, now that she has access, she knows, she says, based on watching everybody else's assignments, that she'll be able to deliver the first 6 weeks that by the end of this week. So I had office hours this morning and we talked about that, and she feels very confident that she can do this. So I'm going to give her the benefit of the doubt. Up until now, the rest of my students have all kept up. I've not had any students, fall behind.
Yeah.
I have had students drop out, but none have fallen behind except this one student who's willing to do the work. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. Because starting week 7 is the movie.
Oh,
Their
so that's coming
final,
up.
the final in my class is a movie with a script. So they have to take the script and memorize it. Then they have to take individual shots that were recorded for this movie and they have to assemble it into a story.
Wow.
And that's their final.
Yeah. That's a lot of work. And so that's kind of like the final project. And then leading up into it, you have mini projects where they learn the skills.
Inside this movie, every week will be an assignment that they have to perform towards finishing their movie. So every week, not only will they have an assignment to teach them how to cut with a script, but they'll also have, the assignment will be towards their final, but they have to post a YouTube video to be graded every single week. Now, is that what you are calling scaffolding?
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. In fact, it's such a great example. It's why I wanted to do this workshop. And in fact, I wanted to show you, your approach is actually way better. So I thought it was on my class here. Let me go back to it. So what I do is I have my first check-in around week 5, which I think is kind of late. And that is their proposal. And it's very short. It's worth 20 points. But I like your approach better. And what I could think about the next time I do this, so like a lot of you, I have this set up in weeks. And so the first week, they learn about anthropology and ethnomusicology. Week 2, we talk about soundscapes. And then we get to week 5. And this is where they do the project proposals. Again, it's only worth 20 points, and I give detailed feedback. What I could do using Solange's approach is I could, for example, have in week 2 a discussion board or some place where they would comment on, hey, in the first 2 weeks of the class, I got really interested in soundscapes and maybe I might think about that for my project. So I could do a check-in every maybe 2 weeks. I don't know for my class, it's not really hands-on like yours. It's hands-on in a sense, but it's not like one technological skill or a series of technological skills. It's little bits and pieces of different things. But I could do that every 2 weeks. Like in week 2, I could have a check-in. And then when they do their final proposals in week 5, that's a big check-in. Here's your topic. And then maybe week 7, I could say, I want you now to comment on your progress. And maybe I'd have to, let me ask you this. Each of those little steps are worth points, right? As you move up to those are all worth points.
Every single assignment is worth 50 points. It has to include their video and a screenshot of their Premiere Pro. So it's 50 points each every week.
That's the second key. So again, we're making our list here, mental list of things with the scaffolding. The second thing is Solange is using points. And I think my mistake was this. I did a discussion board called Projects Discussion. This was the check-in. And I will blur this later, by the way. Actually, this one was not this was supposed to be a check-in. One student, and I'll show you his work later, he posted it in the wrong area, which was fine. He was a great student. But what I discovered was that because the optional discussion wasn't worth points, there wasn't any activity. It was dead. So what Solange is doing by scaffolding and adding points, little bits to each segment moving up until the final project, I think works a lot better than my approach. Again, this is why we do these workshops, because I feel like, oh, I would improve this, I would change this. Even though mine is not a hands-on use of Premiere Pro, I mean, they did work with Audacity a little bit, but nothing like the deep dive that Solange is doing. I feel that by having every few weeks, by going back, I would revise my class. This would be a great workshop approach for a faculty day. We could all show a class, and then based on what people say, we would talk about how we would revise. So I would revise based on Solange's approach, more check-ins, like every 2 weeks, and then I would do those worth points. And let me ask Justin, so do you think that would work? Like in your case, could you do frequent check-ins, and could you give little points allotted for those check-ins or discussions as they work on their projects?
This is a really good idea. This is really genius. And I've seen other instructors use the scaffolding method. Now that I'm thinking about it, I think what I would do differently, and I probably will do differently when I teach a class in the spring, is do like the outline, do like an outline draft, and have that just do first, after like week 4 or something, week 4 or 5. Probably week 4 would be good. And then it's just worth less, like half the points that I'm, giving now for the whole term. And then in a, couple more weeks or a few weeks, then they have their final outline draft, because then that can allow me to give them feedback too on that first draft. Then they have their final draft with the presentation. That way, they're a little more confident with their presentation, that their topic is good and all that. And then have that essay due, at the end. So basically, I would be adding the element of like a pre-outline draft, and dividing up the points a little bit more. So that, because right now I kind of have scaffolding where I have 2 levels. The essays based on the outline and presentation, but this would allow me to have a 3rd level that builds on it. So I think it's a great idea.
I'm going to, anything he names on here, I will blur later, believe me, in the final video. But one of the things that Justin's saying that reminds me of something is you might want to consider this scenario, and this happens. I think sometimes students decide they propose something, and you look at it, and in your professional opinion, you think to yourself, I don't know if you can do this. You might tweak it or totally change it. So this is a sample here. This is a student that wanted to do, and it was a great final project, a demonstration of how sound was used in both ICU, so in intensive care units, and also spas. And I loved it because I'm like, it's very cool, 2 different spaces. And I have a friend who, he owns a music or sound design studio in New York City called Made Music Studio. And he is way into this work now for changing the sounds that are used in ICUs or the sounds used in electric cars. Because so much of our environment these days is determined by, you turn on your cell phone, there's a particular sound that indicates something. So in the case of like an ICU, you want something that's meaningful, but maybe you also want it to be something that's soothing for the person. So I love this approach of the student's project, and this is the type of feedback. And I talked about dates. So a lot of it was kind of like, keep in mind, you need to do this. As mentioned in the syllabus, here are all the project details. And then I just said here, I would look at some major themes. When you discuss personal experiences, bring in your own subjective experiences with sound. So this is the type of feedback I give. And typically in my feedback, I will say, the short of it is, it looks great. Take my suggestions. Make sure you read the syllabus so you know all the details about the project and what's required. and it's good to go. In other cases, I will say to a student, I don't know if I really feel this. It doesn't sound very clear. Let's talk again. So in Solange's approach, where there's check-ins throughout the quarter, you can do that. What I didn't do, again, improvements can be made between weeks 5 and 11. So in week 5, they turn in their proposal. I give the feedback, but then my worry is, are they reading the feedback? And then are they going to check in with me? So what I did was I set up some optional Zoom sessions to check in on projects, and I did a discussion board. In both cases, few takers. And again, I'm thinking because of Solange's examples, I didn't assign points. So what I should do is week 5, project proposal, read my comments. Week 7, we do a discussion board, or you have to turn in another short paper and say, based on reading my comments, how are you moving forward with your project? And make that worth 20 points. Because I think, do both of you agree that the fact that I didn't assign points, maybe I didn't have any takers because a lot of students, I hate to say it, but they might not do it if there aren't points assigned to that next check-in?
I feel that points have added major incentive for the students to follow through. And especially if the value of the points is significant. I don't know if 20 points is enough. I'm up to 50 points on each week is 50 points.
What's your total possible in the class?
The breakdown is they take all of the weeks up to week 11. So it's 11 weeks are considered 70% of the grade. And then the final project is worth 30% of the grade. So it's an accumulative.
Okay, got it. Yeah, in my case, sorry, just say real quick. My class is 700 points. So what I would probably do is I would keep these at 20, because if you got to like say 70, that's a letter grade, 70 out of 700. But I would put in more of these. So I could have 20 points in week 2, 20 points in week 5, 20 points in week 7, maybe. Go ahead, Justin.
Sure. Yeah. To answer your question, you were saying, you were asking about offering points.
Right.
Did you say to meet with you, kind of like on Zoom, to kind of give feedback?
Well, I'd have to figure that out. I'm not sure. So I could say on Zoom, but it could also be a discussion board or a short paper that they submit through assignments.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. I was just asking because, in our previous teaching talks, we had the whole discussion about to what extent for DE courses can we really require them to set time aside to meet with us on Zoom for an assignment. So I would be more inclined to say, doing like a paper submission or discussion board where you can communicate. They can communicate at their own leisure. And the other point I would add to this is I certainly would not do it for extra credit points, because I think you said in your own experience, offering extra credit points, for example, for coming to a Zoom session, you get like 2, 3 takers. So I don't think you'd get anybody that way if it was like optional extra credit. So I'd make it required and do it in a format, one of those other formats where you could correspond with them. Something. I think that would be a great idea.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I would not do extra credit. I also think that if you wanted to, what I tried in this class, it didn't work, so I stopped the option. But in week 1, I said, if you don't want to do your text discussion board, the asynchronous, let's meet synchronously on Zoom and have a conversation. It was super awkward. Only 2 students attended. One of those students ended up dropping, and I felt like I wasn't prepared because I was like, okay, we're going to have an open discussion, and they wanted more of a lecture. So I did have a PowerPoint ready, but I think you're right. I think probably, if you do the Zoom, it's optional. You could say, meet with me or your classmates on Zoom, or do the text discussion board, or to make it simple, just turn in another, 100-word or 250-word analysis of how you read my comments based on your proposal, what we looked at a few minutes ago, and then discuss how you're moving forward. But I just think if you have check-ins, there's a chance of greater success. And this class was very rare. In the end, I had all successful projects. A few were better than the others, but because the students have been doing so great, even those students that got B's on the project, they ended up getting A's in the class because their discussions and other assignments were so strong. So I feel like, again, if you're allotting a lot of points to a project, in my case, it was worth 50% of the grade basically, then it's probably incumbent on the instructor to say, we're going to do some more check-ins because I want you to all be successful. But I've never had so much stress, both joy and stress, assigning this. As I said, with the values of a class project, I think, hands-on stuff and learning new technology skills, talking to your peers, a chance to be creative and do something really different. Those are all great values. But then for me, those often are outweighed by one main challenge, and that is the procrastinator or the student who's really off and just doesn't follow your instructions. So I think in Solange's case, the likelihood of that happening is slim, because by week 3, you kind of know the format. Okay, she expects me to know about Premiere Pro. If I don't get this together for my dailies and my film in week 7, I'm not going to do well. So you're getting the students to week 7, it sounds like.
My first 6 weeks are based on Premiere Pro and exercises on learning different elements of Premiere Pro, importing picture, importing audio, syncing them both, adding music. Every week is a different element of Premiere Pro, and then the movie happens week 7. So every week you're given a different assignment, and by week 7 you will have the overview of Premiere Pro. And hands-on each week, you will have hands-on assignments worth 50 points. And then by week 7, you'll be prepared to actually start cutting a movie already knowing Premiere Pro.
Yeah. That's
Now,
really good.
I was gonna ask you, Dr. Todd, do you do office hours?
I do them as optional. Yeah. So we are required to do office hours, but I generally don't get a lot of takers. I have a Zoom time set up, but as I said, this quarter, I just think the students that stuck with the class, they were really together. The project I'll show you today, he did an amazing job, just like knocked out of the park, way amazing. The students that struggled, they didn't attend my Zoom sessions or office hours, and a few of them dropped. And I had one guy in particular, he dropped out way at the end, and he said it was related to some COVID stuff. And so I connected him to student services in the dean's office. But I don't have a lot of takers on office hours. And this is the case when I would have in person, where a lot of students, just didn't come into my office except when it was the end of the quarter and they had to do their final projects or final exams. And this is why I think building in points and check-ins of some form, it doesn't have to be over Zoom. Again, Justin mentioned that we don't have to do that. But doing check-ins is probably going to be more successful than optional office hours or optional Zooms, because a lot of students don't necessarily see that they're struggling. And again, if I'm not checking in with them, how do I know? And I can assess some of that going back to my week 5 project proposals, but I don't know if the students are reading my comments. And then if they're reading the comments, are they taking those and improving upon their project? Now, one student I know did, very conscientious, and actually works for the college too, so I knew the student was conscientious. And in her case, she wanted to do 2 different things. She was interested in dubstep or EDM, electronic dance music, and then also wanted to try a sound or music experiment. And she was saying, I want to do both. I don't know which. And I said, try to do both in the same project. Initially she said, I want to do one or the other. I actually encouraged her, well, why don't you try to synthesize? So she took her inspirations, listening to this one famous EDM artist, and then she created her own sonic work. And she struggled with it, and she said, I've never done this before, doing anything musical. And it was great. It was a very vulnerable final project. And it was a great example of the student taking my idea of combining them, and she figured out how to synthesize, and she did a great final project. And that's why I want to do these check-ins, because I feel like if they're not following what we're giving them, the advice we're giving them, then you get to the end and you've got the guys with the NASCAR posters, and it's embarrassing for everybody, right? When that happens, it was embarrassing for me to see that, because I was like, I didn't do my job. I didn't give them enough help to clearly require them to check in and approve. And I think I had them do a project proposal. Here's the other trick. Before I forget this, here's what can happen. This happened, I think, with the NASCAR guys. I had a step in there where I said, you must turn in for 20 points a proposal that describes what you're going to do in your project poster board that we'll display out in the commons at the college. Well, it's worth 20 points. This gets to Solange's point. It's not enough. And so some students then did not do that initial assignment. And they thought, well, it's only 20 points and I can still get an A or B in the class. What do you do in that scenario? Do you just let those students skate and then they show up with an inappropriate topic? Or do you say, I'm sorry, you need to turn in your project proposal. I will not give you points, or I'll give you half points for it, but I'm not going to let you go all the way through, and then week 10 or 11, when your proposal or your project is due, you turn in something that doesn't meet my requirements. So I struggle with that because, Solange, you were saying this is not worth enough points. And then what happens if someone doesn't turn that in? In this case, they all turned it in. Well, what would you recommend for either of you if a student didn't turn in their proposal, which is their right, they don't have to complete assignments? How do I then go and address the fact, hypothetically, if they didn't do this, and I'm worried about that scenario of the students showing up with a NASCAR poster board?
Yeah. So, I thought about this coincidentally. I was worried about this. So, I think I structured a way to avoid it. We'll see how it goes. Because I made the proposal and the presentation go together, due on the same day as well. Submitted separately. One is going to be via Turnitin link, and one will be, the video. But I made them each worth 50 points. So already 50 points for one is already kind of a lot. But combined, it's 100 points, and my class has 1,000 points. So that's a whole letter grade drop.
Wow.
So if you fail to do, if you just don't do any of it, it's a whole letter grade drop. But not only that, it's almost impossible to turn in just half of it because they're both reliant on each other. Well, the presentation is reliant on the outline.
Yeah.
So if you just do the outline but don't do the presentation, you could only get up to 50 points. But that's not going to be a whole lot. And then so it kind of encourages them to basically do both at risk of doing nothing, losing a whole letter grade, or doing only half, being fairly detrimental potentially to their grade. So I'm hoping I've avoided it in that way. But like I said, we'll see.
I think that's really good. So I think, going back to Solange's point, if you look at my project breakdown, 20 points for the proposal, project quality is 310 points, which includes 260, and then the presentation, 50 points. And then they have to do a discussion post at the end that's called What You Learned. So what did you learn from your project? So it sounds like, Solange, your advice was increase this.
To incentivize it. More than 20 points, right?
Is that possible to compensate by adding points to your proposal and then redoing the math for your project?
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. You know what you can do again, when I created the syllabus, I had in my mind, the project would be worth about half the grade, because I just was like, I'm going to try projects again. My typical pattern is I try them, I have a bad experience, like with the Alex Jones person or whatever, and then I don't do them for a year or two, and then I try them again. So what I would do is I would take the 350 and I would maybe add more to the project, which means it's greater than 50% of the grade, and then I could subtract the like amount here, or I could make it an 800 point scale, right? I could do whatever I want, but the point is, if I increase the project breakdown on the proposal and maybe some of those check-ins, then I can have like more substance of the grade is going into not the final project, but the steps getting to that final project. And I think I probably need to do that, because I just don't feel like, and this time I didn't have someone do it. I didn't have someone not turn in the proposal. I've had it in the past, and that's a real challenge. So I don't know. It's something definitely we need to think about, because if it's make or break and it's 50% of the grade, are you doing a disservice to the student if you're not helping them take those steps along the way to get to where they need to get to do an A, or let's say minimum B quality project? I never want a C. I feel like A or B projects are great. Not everyone's going to get an A, but if you get a C project, you've failed C or lower. You've failed a lot of just comprehension of the ideas behind the project itself.
I have a question. Couldn't you just add a disclaimer that says if you fail to turn in the proposal, even though it's for 20 points, that you failed the whole project?
I think you could. It gets into...
it's risky because someone might not do it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if you kind of send out reminders from the beginning of the term and kind of put it in your, when you're kind of do your introductory video
Yeah.
class, you just kind of reiterate like how important this is to do this proposal and why, explain to them why, for their own benefit, so on. So maybe that would help. That way you don't have to, if you don't want to have to adjust your points, you could just kind of make that a required element of it, like all or nothing. This has to be, in other words, the whole project has to have all of its parts. You cannot not submit to one of the elements.
I think it's possible that there could be a great dispute on that. I would almost think about maybe the other approach could be, like in my case, you don't turn it in. You lost the 20 points, but you must then turn it in. You have a week grace period. If you don't turn it in by week 6, the end of week 6, Sunday at 5, then you'll lose 100 points from the project or something. And then at that point, then maybe the student says, okay, maybe I can't stick with the class, or I need to meet with the professor separately, privately, and explain what's happened, because I don't want that scenario, because the truth is you're probably going to fail the project anyway. If you turn in a proposal, you're getting feedback and you're making sure you cover, like in this case, they have a rubric for their project. Does it engage with music, sound, and anthropology? And in a couple cases, I graded students down. I said, you had a great presentation in terms of sound and music, but you didn't talk about anthro. This class is anthropology. It's not just musicology. It's not just sonic studies. You have to cover the anthro. So I made that very clear that if they didn't cover anthropology in each of these components, then they would lose points. So I think we could do something there. I just don't have an idea right now how I would do this. I think I would add more points, and then I would include more check-ins. So check-in 1 might be week 2 or 3. What do you think might be a project? And that could be a discussion board, and it'll be worth 10 or 20 points, whatever my discussions are worth. Week 5 is the formal proposal. I grade those, and then in week 6 or 7, the students have to respond maybe with another response paper in which they discuss how they're doing in terms of incorporating my feedback. And then maybe a third check-in would be around week 9 or something, where they're in the final stages and they would have to talk to their classmates or to me and explain what their final project looks like, how is their PowerPoint going, what are they going to present to the class, etc. And then they do the final presentation in week 10 or 11. But I think I need to change this, because I just don't think one check-in is enough. The optional check-ins don't work. I interspersed between office hours and optional project check-ins and optional project boards every couple weeks, but no, I didn't have any takers other than maybe 1 or 2, and no one on Zoom. So what you're both saying is I think points have to go into that incentivizing of the check-ins with the students. And in Solange, in your case, it's built in. You don't have to change anything. Like, you do it, and it's like every week is a mini project.
Correct.
Every week. Yeah.
That's correct. I'm wondering if you used a Canvas inbox to consult your students to let them know that they need to get on their projects and their proposals. Do you use Canvas inbox?
Yeah, I do. I use inbox and also announcements. In fact, in this class, I want to say we could look at my announcements. I think there were some panicked proposals. Let's see. Here we go. Yeah, or panicked announcements about proposals. I said, hi, everyone. Hope you had a good Thanksgiving break. I wanted to put the projects on your radar screen. Some of you have reached out about them, so it's likely you're in full swing in terms of working on them. Again, there's a due date, but to have enough opportunity for all of us to engage with them, I would love posting on the board starting in week 11. That was the other thing. I made it kind of optional, where I said you could post it from this date to this date. The problem was, by the time most of the students posted their final project, the class was over. And, they didn't get to enjoy and see their colleagues' proposals. I've done this in the past. You can do, it's a little hard to manage, but you can do judging sessions among your student colleagues, your peers, and have them rate each other's projects. And you could use that as a component of their grade. And typically the students are nice about that. They want to go easy on their peers because they want the same thing, kind of quid pro quo, scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. But so to answer your question, I did both announcements and Canvas inbox because I was worried about a couple people, and I did have a few drops in this class. So however you can check in. Do you do that, Solange? Do you use the inbox if someone's not talking?
Ever. Actually, yes, all the time. What
Mhm.
happens is in discussions when their YouTube is posted and students have access, other students have access to watch
Mhm.
their YouTube. They can watch each other's YouTubes.
Yeah.
I reply to all of them. I
Okay.
reply to every single project that's, even if it just means this is perfect, this is outstanding, you've met all the requirements, it's exactly what it needs to be. I will reply. And then if there's a problem, not only will I put it in the reply, but then I copy the reply and send them an inbox message as well, because not all the students read the replies.
Yeah. Yeah.
So only if there's a problem, I'll actually copy paste it into a message in Canvas inbox. And
Yeah.
that's the only way you can reach me. I don't take emails and I don't do phone calls. It's only Canvas inbox.
I'm kind of the same. I love Canvas Inbox because you log in, it tells you how many messages you have, and you feel like everybody will get that message as long as they log onto their class. So I agree.
And most students don't use their LTCC.
No, it's rare. No, I agree. Yeah, so I think, coming up with ways to get them to check in is whatever we can do, continue to talk about this. And in fact, I would say that by doing projects, we can fulfill two important legal requirements, if we will, under Title V, and also kind of best practices at the state level with DE instruction. And that is student-to-student contact is required, and instructor-to-student contact. So if you do a project and you can get that loop going between the student and instructor and student, you're not just fulfilling all those values that we talked about in terms of project, you're fulfilling a value of DE education that's required to make sure that students are talking with each other and students are talking with you as the instructor. One other thing I want to suggest on this is I really recommend having a module specific to projects. I added this for the first time this quarter. So it has the due dates and a preferred due date. Again, maybe it's a little loosey-goosey and thus everyone waited till December 14th or 15th. I have all these pages. So this is the component as a reminder. It's also in the syllabus. And then I take them through a series of this is a tutorial, so I recorded it just for this. This takes them through how to record using Canvas Studio. If you're new to it, this was the optional Zoom, the Q&A. Nobody attended, so okay, that one didn't work. Whatever. This was the project discussion, so I tried to get them to discuss their projects. Again, not a lot of takers. This is the What You Learn board, where they talked about their projects and discussed all the values. And again, visually they were quite good. I thought I enjoyed. I'll show you a sample of one real quick. And then this was another, I didn't do it. It was to be announced, a Zoom, because no one wanted to do the first one. And then a note about project quality. Please, please, please. It's worth a ton of points. It has to be high quality. And the important step is review my comments and then please take my insights. So what I need to do for the next version of this class is do this in the class. Instead of putting it as a page at the end that the students may not read, I'll incorporate that, as Solange is talking about, and also Justin with his new project approach, to make sure that the students are actually reading my comments. I have to say, all right, you're going to do this and it'll be worth points. You're going to respond to me to make sure we have a feedback loop going and that you're clearly understanding what we're doing here. So if you can do that, I recommend it. I think it's a great approach to have a separate project module. And this is a sample here. I won't turn on the volume maybe, or I'll just turn it down. But this was a student who was very interested in, he's a big runner, and he wanted to look at how, there's a rhythm to running. And then he also wanted to look at the idea that he listens to a particular style of music when he's running. And what I loved about his thing was later in the video, he took sounds. He's in a studio here, his home studio, and he took sounds from his running and he made a track out of that. It was really brilliant. Like, when he was running there with his dog, it was kind of the rhythm of running. He recorded that. He recorded some ambient sounds, and he was super skilled. Like, he does a lot of music and recording on his own, and he was definitely at the top of the class. In terms of technology, I don't know what software he used here, but he had a great project, and it was definitely at the top of the class. And you can also see it was like 20 minutes long, and he even did end credits. So this would be like someone more in like Solange's class where he's actually, doing it start to finish. The credits aren't playing here, but it was really cool. It was a great project. So I think whatever you do for your projects, the other thing to think about, we didn't talk about this so much, is the project format. Again, in my case, I love face-to-face presentations or Zoom presentations. I agree with Justin because it's not an Eve class. The best bet is to use the technology like Canvas Studio and have them record the presentation. Not all of them were this level. In fact, I had one student, she set her phone up and she kind of recorded the screen. It didn't look bad, but the audio was a little sketchy. So in my comment, I said, in the future, please use the direct Canvas Studio feature that allows you to record simultaneously your icon, your voice from your microphone, and also what's happening on your screen. So she used her phone and set it up kind of on a book, and the audio was not great. Whereas this student had a professional quality video, and it was phenomenal. And I think he did edits clearly, so he was doing video editing. So this was at the top of the class. But however you decide to do project presentations, I think about if there's technology involved, like in my case, I felt like I had to do a tutorial to have them learn Canvas Studio. Now, Solange, in your case, it's required to learn Premiere Pro, so you're set really. Like you take them through the baby steps, and then do you generally find by week 7 most of the students do a good job, or do some struggle with their final projects?
This quarter, all of my students have been able to complete all the assignments successfully.
Okay. Good.
So, and it's like you said, it's baby steps.
Yeah.
And also my projects are never over 2 minutes.
Oh, wow.
In fact, this week it's 20 seconds.
Oh,
Because
wow.
I
Okay.
know they have other classes, and
Yeah.
to make them do anything longer than 2 minutes is kind of a struggle. So
Yeah.
the final project is 15 minutes.
Mhm.
So, but all the material is given to them. All they have to do is assemble it into a story.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they've had to come up with their own audio and video these first 7 weeks, individual assignments, none of which are over 2 minutes.
Okay. Yeah.
And you know what I might do? And I think this particular student, 17 or 18 minutes, I think I said 10 minutes. Some students will go longer. And I always tell students, if you want to go longer, that's great. If it was 3 hours long, maybe not. But the problem is if it's too short. So if I want you to do a 10-minute video and you do a 2-minute video, then that's a problem. What I would probably do is if I went back in this class and I redid my points, I did more check-ins, I might shorten the project because the points might get a little lower in terms of the final project value points because we're doing more check-ins or something like that. I could even say, to get you to learn the Canvas Studio by week 5, I want you to do your project proposal as a Canvas Studio video. And then that way I avoid that student who's using her phone to record it because she's committed to learning Canvas Studio by week 5. So there are tricks we could do, I think, throughout the class to get them to scaffold up like Solange is doing very formally because it's a practicum hands-on kind of class. In my case, I need to probably rework again how I'm approaching the check-in points because I lucked out this quarter, but in other quarters, I've had disasters at the end, and I feel like I haven't done enough to get them where they need to be during the class.
Is there a reason why your points are at 700 and not 1,000?
The only reason is it would work with 1,000. I do 700 because it's easy. My math is bad. I have no math skills. I can figure out that, a letter grade is 70 points, but 1,000, a letter grade's 100 points. So I could totally do 1,000. Yeah. There's no real reason. Yeah.
I give you the opportunity to do the proposal, have more points worthy of the proposal.
That's a good idea. Justin, what do you do points in your class?
Yeah, I do 1,000 points.
You do 1,000. And is it because it's easy to figure out 100 points a letter grade?
That and also just more room for error if they really bad on something. They miss something. It's not like they're toast, They can still recover.
Right.
And I do have students that have like a C in the class for a lot of the time, and then they kind of realize like, okay, I need to get serious here, and they kind of pick it up towards the end or learn from their feedback and mistakes, and they can still recover. But I think with less points, there's less opportunity to do that.
I might change that. It's like a mental. I had a colleague, he taught chemistry. He's at Butte College now, but he said he always made it like 1,000 points because there's something mentally that when a student sees that they still have 700 points in the class, they feel like they could do it. The worst grading scale I ever had when I first started teaching at the college in '98, I made a class worth 100 points. It was a disaster. It was awful because the test would be worth like 30 points and maybe the quizzes were 10 points, but students would be up in arms. They're like, I can never get past a 70, and it was a total disaster because mentally, even though you say, if you take the digit off, right? If you remove the last zero from 1,000, that's 100 points. It's the same thing percentage wise, but mentally there's something about more points are left if it's 700 points left versus 30 points left if it's out of 100. So don't do it out of 100. It's a disaster.
Yeah, go ahead, Solange.
My grades are grouped as a percentage value. So if every week is 50 points, and the first 7 weeks that's 350 points, that is 70% of your grade. So mine is broken down into percentage values.
Okay. Yeah. However you do it, I don't do percentages as much. I just think of percentages, for the letter grades, and I tell my students that too. But the good news is Canvas gradebook, it's full-fledged. You can do so much in there, whether your points or percentages. So I love the gradebook myself.
Right. I do too.
But I think I might, based on this conversation, I would switch a lot here. I would definitely, I think, switch to 1,000. It just sounds like it's just better for the students because they have that mental picture. I can still do it. I can still get an A or B in this class. I like that. Yeah. 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 Well, this has been so. I know it's about one. So, any closing thoughts or things that you would recommend? We've covered a lot in this, and again, I feel like I can totally revamp my class now based on both of your great input here. Any other final recommendations to faculty about things to look out for with projects or recommendations you have for people listening to this video?
I feel that giving a grade value, a point value, worthy of incentive to have the student do the project at your assigned due date, give them enough points to have them do the job, do the projects. Make sure you have enough points to make it worth it.
Yeah, I love that. And then spread those points out. Like in my case, go back through the class and put in more check-ins, have those assignments worth a little more, and then not as much as writing on that final project. So the students will feel better about it because there is like a mental block, I think, for some students if they see that half their letter grade gets determined in week 11. That's a pretty big, it's almost like your master's thesis or your dissertation defense. Like, whoa, I hope they pass me because otherwise I'm not getting my PhD or whatever. So I think putting the points and spreading them out in my class case as a sample of a class that needs improvement is a great suggestion because I lucked out this time, but in the past I've had students fail, because they just didn't get it.
And I didn't have enough check-ins. Yeah, go ahead, Justin.
Yeah, no, I was going to say basically what you're just saying. I'm kind of learning my lesson right now about scaffolding. I should have implemented a little bit more scaffolding. I mean, I have scaffolding because I have like 2 parts to this thing, but I really should have more. So, that's my advice. Advice that I haven't quite taken myself yet.
And I'm wondering, Solange, let me ask you, with your industry experience, do you do this because when you work in the film industry, do people work on things at the last minute, or if you're doing a sound project, is it like over a nice relaxed period of time and you can feel like you're going to get there to the end because you're not rushing at the last minute?
I have many deadlines throughout the movie. So I have multiple levels of assignments to do on the movie. Like the first step is to cue.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the queuing is due in 2 weeks. Do I wait to the end of the 2 weeks to do the queuing? Absolutely. I'm human, just like everybody else. But it does get done because I know how to pace myself. And then the next step is recording. Well, the recording is a very defined deadline.
Mm-hmm.
if I have 5 days to record, I have to record so much every day to make those 5 days. So you have to be able to pace yourself in order to make the deadlines. But I have many deadlines throughout the entire project.
It was kind of a leading question. I assumed that was the answer. And that's why I think, having that industry experience, it's another thing to pass on to students. Say, hey, if you're working on a job, you're working for Google, or you're working for a big, movie studio or whatever in the work world, you have these deadlines and you can't just decide I'm going to put it off to the last minute, because then you just won't be successful. So the other thing, to go back to values here in closing, is, it's teaching the value of deadlines, and projects have deadlines and you have to meet those. And if you don't, and Justin, this working corporate jobs too, there isn't a lot of flexibility as there is in education, where it's like, oh, we'll give you a grace period. So
you just get fired.
You just get fired, right?
I feel that the students need a deadline. They need every week something to work towards. And also it helps them with the rest of their classes, because I know that I'm not the only class being taught. I'm not the only class they're taking. So I think in terms of, how does my class impact their studies for their other classes? So I try to spread out all of the assignments.
Yeah, love that. That's a great opportunity for all of us to learn from that and just spread things out. And hopefully we, teach our students some skills about meeting deadlines and being proactive and staying ahead of it.
Adding value to it.
Yeah. Making it work. Adding value. Yeah. Yeah, like that idea of improvement. Like if you're working on a musical piece or a film, it's like this idea that you go through different drafts, and same thing with writing. You write an article and it's like you're going to get feedback from your peers, and they're not. In fact, I have a deadline due this month on a chapter I haven't finished, and it's like it's a lot of work, but it's the whole point of like a peer process and reviewing it and improving and having a better final version. So,
can I just add to that real quick?
Yeah.
So, in last quarter, I didn't have any type of written essay. I just had their discussion post every week, quizzes, and I did a midterm and exam. And I got very positive feedback from the students, actually, very positive. But with a couple of them meeting, during office hours or something, or maybe even one of the comments on the feedback was that how they thought it was a bit unusual for similar types of humanities or kind of literature type classes they've taken where they do have an essay, was almost in the sense that they maybe would have preferred to have an essay rather than, the exams. Yeah. So this term I'm doing that. I have this essay project and all that. But part of the reason why I'm starting to feel a bit nervous about not having done scaffolding enough and allowing them to build on it and kind of go through the process and learn how to do the essay is that some students taking the class might be taking it for the first time. Yeah. And they don't have experience taking these types of classes and writing essays. And so I kind of, when I was kind of taking that student feedback on board to implement this essay to this class, I was almost under the assumption that, all the students in the class will have had experience, maybe, writing an essay or something, maybe in high school, but not maybe at the college level. Yeah. And so I'm becoming more conscious now of the need for the scaffolding and kind of guiding them. For those that already know how to do it, they'll still learn something. It'll still be beneficial, but it'll really be beneficial for those that maybe don't quite know what they're doing.
I have found that when a student is new to the college and they don't quite understand that they have something due in 5 weeks or 12 weeks, there's something due, that they don't have the discipline to allow themselves so many hours a week to do it. That's why I do weekly assignments, to make them meet a certain point every single week. So that way I know they're on track, and I'll know if someone's falling behind because it's every week.
I think, Justin, you could almost do an optional thing where you say, I'm going to hold a Zoom or an office hour where if you're brand new to writing essays and you want one-on-one help, please meet with me or something. Because that would be fair. I think adding, your points are already set, but what about an optional check-in this quarter?
Yeah, that's a good idea. I could set one up. I've also actually this week right now, before our session right now, I'm working on kind of putting together what I'm going to do a video that an instructional video that guides them through how to do the outline, how to do the
Great.
presentation,
Yeah.
how to do the essay. And so as part of that, I think that something that I'm going to end, the video with, making a comment about that.
Yeah.
That if you are new to essay writing at the college level, then definitely,
Yeah.
like meet with me so I can give you some more guidance. Yeah.
Good.
That's
Yeah, I
great.
do video. I
Yeah.
have videos every week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Super important.
Important to walk them through the steps. And the last thing I'd say about it is, you could also consider like a survey at the end of the quarter. If the students have completed the projects, an optional survey that just says what I liked about it, where I could use some more help. And that way you get some feedback about what they would like in the future that might make it easier for future students who take your class. Because, there's always room for improvement on our part, of course. Yeah. Well, cool. I think I've got some other meetings coming up, and I'm sure all of you do as well. So I appreciate the great suggestions. It was a really good working session. I just feel a lot better about projects now because I think we have some collaborative ideas to take forward. So it's been great. Yeah. So anything else or no?
No.
Okay. Cool. Okay, well, I guess we'll. So next week, I'm forgetting the topic, but I will send an update out, and we'll meet again next week, same time, same Zoom place.